Our speaker tonight is Mr. Ming Tang. He recently retired as a lead associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, where he managed supersonic and hypersonic advanced technology programs at Booz Allen Hamilton, NASA, the Skunk Works, and the Pentagon. Tang began his NASA career in June 1966 at NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center in Edwards, California. At Dryden, he progressed from research engineer for projects to project manager for the YF-12, the intercept version of the SR-71, and the B-1 flight test programs. In October 1982, he joined the staff at the Lockheed Skunk Works, where he led the business development activities for aerial reconnaissance programs, which included the SR-71, the U-2, the TR-1, and the ER-2. Tang returned to NASA in 1987 as Assistant Director for the National Aerospace Plane NASP program at NASA headquarters, Washington, D.C. In October 1988, he was assigned as the Principal Deputy Director of the NASP Interagency Office at the Pentagon. In May 1991, the Air Force selected Tang as the NIO Director, a position he held until the conclusion of the NASP program. Tang transferred to NASA Langley Research Center as Associate Chair Director in 1995. From September 1996 through September 1999, he served as the Chief Engineer for the High Speed Research Program. From October 1999 to February 2005, Tang served as the Deputy Director of Military Programs and responsible for oversight, coordination, and advocacy of military programs. Tang retired from NASA and joined Booz Allen Hamilton as an associate in February 2005. Tang holds a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering, master's degree in aerospace engineering and systems management, respectively. He has completed additional leadership studies at the Federal Executive Institute in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Ming Tang.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come to our state. This is, I believe, my third trip, thanks to Dr. Wells. That long introduction, I think of myself, especially for tonight's talk, as sort of a migrant hypersonic worker. But it's been very useful being a number of different agencies, including a stint in industry where they do the real work, and the Pentagon where you see what the military does. What I'll be describing to you is about 50 years of this country's, just U.S. effort in hypersonics. And there'll be a lot of pictures now. I'll go into as many of them you're interested in. There's basically only two charts that I'd like you to remember. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask. I'll show you those right away. Two ways to get up to hypersonic speeds, which is, according to Shapiro's textbook, it's Mach 5. It's not a clear division like subsonic, supersonic, and hypersonic. But around Mach 5 is generally accepted as above that is hypersonic. Next chart, please. This is the order of the organization. We don't have, you guys can read the title. Next, please. This is one I'll spend a lot of time, is one you should pay attention to. This basically describes the hypersonic domain and what the means of getting there. On the vertical scale is ISP, it's like miles per gallon type of thing. It happens to be seconds. You guys can look it up. Why is that way? And this is Mach number. And the horizontal lines shows the rocket ISP. There's two lines. The upper one is hydrogen. The lower one is hydrocarbon fuel. And the slanted lines, same order, hydrogen and hydrocarbon fuel. Now you have three different propulsion systems. Turbojet, that's the kind of airplanes that you guys ride in. And as you go up Mach number, up to about Mach 4 is ramjet. And that's been successfully demonstrated and used for quite a while. Then what you hear a lot about these days is scramjets, which is the last segment. And all that is supersonic combustion ramjet. One thing, a couple of things to point out to you in this chart. One, you notice the ISP, even though it's considerably higher than rocket, which the rockets carry oxidizer, that's the main thing. And those above that, ram, scram, and the turbojet use the oxygen in the air. It has higher ISPs at the lower Mach numbers, but it converges as you go to higher Mach number. Later on, I'll show you what we hope NASA can do, the aerospace plane. And the words up there are fairly straightforward. You know, hydrogen gives you a higher energy, but you will always pay a penalty for something. It's great volume. You need, you know, chubby tank, fuselage. But it's easy to ignite. You can keep it burning. The hydrocarbon fuel is what most of the military systems use for the rockets or missiles that you're doing. But because it's more compact, but it doesn't have as high an energy level, and it's hard to light. That's a hard thing. Basically, that's it. That's the region, if you can think of people talking about high speed, somewhere on that chart. I think I showed a couple of figures where we hope to go with NASA. And the lower one, probably the Black Swift, which DARPA tried to do a scramjet using hydrocarbon fuel. Next chart, please. Next. Okay, this is a busy chart, a lot of pretty pictures. Rockets, we U.S. been amazingly successful. Before you were born, maybe some of you, we succeeded operating John Glenn rocket with Mercury. Down here vertically, Gemini, we further along, and of course Apollo to the moon. And these two on the right, on the right are represent expendable, the ICBMs that we potentially would use to defend this country. The middle, shuttle, we just retired recently. Primarily rocket that gets you there. We'll talk a little more about shuttle. There's a couple of vehicles on the lower half, which is we haven't built. That's one thing when you get briefed or when you visit the companies. Be sure to separate the theoretical, we wish we can do this, versus the one that actually flown. There's a big difference between, but on charts and pictures, they all look the same. I had to learn that first time I went. There was a company called Rockwell. They built X-15. And in that conference room, I saw all these beautiful pictures. Not all of them were real. I'll go to the X-15 last. Down there, TAV, Trans-Atmospheric Vehicle, sort of like a shuttle type of thing that we were looking at before we got the aerospace plane. You can Google virtually all of these. Rocket and other concepts to get the thing to orbit. And here, X-33, Lockheed had that contract, and with a different rocket system, linear rocket instead of shuttle SSME. It ended when we couldn't build a tank, plus other reasons. ASOM, you see that. I'll talk more about that. Advanced Strategic Air Launch Vehicle. It's both rocket and air breathing. I showed the X-15 up there. We mostly talk about rockets. Very few realize or think about we had a rocket airplane called X-15. Again, most of you probably read about it. And it achieved about Mach 6-ish. And there were 3 of them, and we flew those. That's when I graduated, like you guys. Way back, 66, at Edwards, NASA had 3 of these things. 199 flights. And, but it was manned. There's a big difference between crewed vehicles versus RPVs. both in terms of size, cost, risk, and all that. Most folks that have participated with X-15 know that if they were not manned, we would not have that many flights. We would have lost quite a few of those before we could get to that number of flights. So basically, this message on the chart, other than identifying for you so you can Google it if you're more interested in it, is that with rockets, we have been amazingly successful. There's a lot more than these. These are the, and we know it works. Okay? Next chart, please. This is, from where I see, you have to pardon me, everything else works pretty well, but my vision is greatly deteriorated. Shuttle, all right, shuttle, I showed you earlier, a lot of boosters, but these, the title of this portion is boost glide vehicles. Most of us think of boost glide as a weapon. We'll go through a couple more examples. But shuttle, if you think about it, is a boost glide. It has all that system to get into space. When it comes back, the only power system is control, not lift. So it's the biggest boost glide we've got, but we don't think of it as that. Next, please. This is DARPA's HTV-2, Hypersonic Test Vehicle 2. We flew 2 of these, and they were partially successful. They didn't, and the main reason for this is for a potential weapon. Why? Because both U.S. and the former Soviet Union had a lot of bombs. Okay, and we both figure out counters against ICBMs that come in parabolic or the normal launch and orbital reentry. The boost glide was dreamed up so you don't go all the way to orbit. You go potentially up to about 20-ish. You probably find some of this stuff, but keep it unclassified. You get very fast, very high, then you use the atmosphere, which I showed you one of the other charts, and now you can glide. And by gliding, you have broader footprint, right? Harder to defend, right? If you're in other kind of ICBMs, once you can sight it, it pretty much can come in where you can anticipate. Do the boost intercept or mid-course intercept or final. This is much harder. And so this is one concept. It flew twice and DARPA stopped it now. The next one is also boost glide. It's an Army, you can read the title, Advanced Strike Weapon. And it's about half the range and speed. So we're still looking at this, and again, pointing out, we know rockets work. It just matters how you integrate it and decide how to use it. But it's still difficult. And the key on this kind of vehicles, you've got the propulsion system sort of under control, but the aerodynamics in terms of depressing the trajectory and maneuvering it, the controls effort, and materials. You want to go far, almost all the hypersonic vehicles you have in the order, I think, difficulty. Propulsion, this one has SL, but you have structures. You want a light, you want it to be able to survive extreme heat, and control, or aerodynamics and control, because that is forcing function depending on how high and how fast you want to go. So, again, emphasizing rocket-powered hydrogen, rocket-powered hypersonic systems are more doable than air breathing. I think we'll go to air breathing next. Okay, this is the second chart I want you guys to remember. First, remember the domain and the different kinds of propulsion systems, and using the two typical fuels, hydrogen and hydrocarbon. This one's simpler. It's altitude versus Mach number. I show two corridors on here, two boundaries. That swath shows the National Aerospace path, flight path. The reason you have that band instead of all over that chart is the lower band represents density, or the thermal heat load, because of thickness, the number of air molecules, if you will. And if you go much lower than that, the heating problem becomes more. Remember I just said a blue sky, one of the problems is, structures. The upper boundary is you get above that, you don't have enough oxygen to sustain combustion. So that's the corridor we thought we could fly the aerospace plane through. But we showed like all the way into orbit. Remember I mentioned to you, looking at the convergence of the scramjet with rockets. After working this, a lot of tunnel, a lot of analysis, discovered that really you could probably get up to Mach 16, 17. Then you have to use rocket to go the rest of the way in orbit. You can't ever reach all the way. The lower end, up to Mach 6, shows Black Swift, the DARPA program. And the reason that chart says, the Black Swift is not NAS, because when DARPA started this program, everybody was saying, oh, you're doing NAS. Hardly. The challenge in NAS was huge. Black Swift and all the current programs you hear, hypersonics, using hydrocarbon fuel, only go to max Mach about 6. In fact, we haven't got there yet in terms of hydrocarbon fuel. In terms of hydrogen, I showed you we did reasonably well. So again, this is a much simpler chart than the other one. These two sort of set the framework for you when people talk about hypersonics. They're different, both in intent and challenge. Again, the most difficult part is propulsion, and then materials and structures, then aero and control. Okay, next please. This is not a chart that makes those of us who work hypersonic very proud. 50 years of programs. Again, you can Google these different titles on. Call out that middle bunch says national, the middle one, National Aerospace Plane. Whenever you throw national in there, you get more money. It's usually funded by multi-agencies. Like when we worked on NAS, the middle one is 5 agencies. DARPA initiated it, SDI, Navy, Air Force, and NASA. And eventually 5 contractors. It's very difficult. When you guys start running things, my bias is multi-support is bad. Think of what you want to do. If you get the one next to you to share in doing it, generally because you don't have enough money, nor you. That's why you're going to be partners, right? Then your idea, what you want to do, and your idea are not exactly alike. So it gets much more difficult. So when you have something like 5 agencies and so on, that's on the funding side. On the performance side, it's difficult too. You got 5 companies that want equal amount of money. So you may have a technical problem to solve. Instead of choosing the best company to do that problem, you have to give everybody 20%. Not quite that bad, but it's almost like that. So having worked multi-agency, it's you have to be not only an engineer but a psychologist. Across the top, if you think about it, 50 years of this, every year. I showed you in the rocket how much was done. Both ASOM, Advanced Strategic Launch Vehicle, I have a chart on that, really was a ramjet, but they were much smarter than we are today, I think. They had 7 launches and 7 successes, air launch. And the last one went Mach 5.5. It was classified for a long time, but it's it's open now. And then in terms of scramjet, we had only 2 programs that flew. NASA flew hydrogen-fueled X-43 at Mach 7 to 10. I'll show you a chart on that, and it's not that easy. Recently, the Air Force had a 2 that worked. It got up to slightly above Mach 5 with hydrocarbon fuel. But when you think 50 years, you only have 3 programs. One with 1 flight, one with 2 flight, one with 2 that succeeded. It shows you how difficult it is. A lot of these things started in, and I might as well tell you, before you even ask, why didn't these things go to completion? One, I think we underestimated the challenge. And second, when we start having problems, generally what you do is claim you could do more. Seriously, you think in terms of a balanced program that you can sell someday. It's a balance in terms of cost, schedule, and performance. And as you run into problems, you take longer, takes more money, and sometimes in order to keep the thing funded, you exaggerate the performance. You finally get canceled, you spend more money, more time, you have improved the performance. Or politically, you get stopped because things change. So I show you the 3 that worked. Next, please. ASOM, air-launched, and it was very clever. Again, I keep saying people in the past must hope you guys change the trend. But they were very smart. We have been successful. If you Google ASOM, you find that the propulsion was a hybrid of rocket and air breathing. It was solid rocket fuel. The casing that holds it becomes the nozzle, if you will, for the ramjet. Once the solid fuel burns out, that cylinder, hollow cylinder, is still there, connected to the ramjet, and it worked. It was established when we had the Soviet Union to contend with. We needed something like this to intercept the Soviet AWACS, and it was a successful program as far as this flight test, and it was ended because the Soviets changed and so on. Next, please. Okay, this is, I consider a baby NAS, but it really is NASA's X-43. Hydrogen fuel, just like National Aerospace was meant to be. But it's not a simple operation, you know. It's the same way we did X-15. Airlifted by B-52. And then taken further to a higher speed by the Pegasus rocket. It took it to Mach 7 for one flight, and another flight, Mach 10. Separated from the carrier rocket, and then accelerated some with the scramjet, and it works. Again, if you refer back to Shapiro's scramjet, supersonic combustion ramjet, typically initiates about Mach 6 to 7. You know, initially you still have mixed flow, some ram, some scram, but in order to establish pure scram, you're usually up around 7. And it succeeded with 2 flights. Next, please. And this shows the X-51 of the Air Force hydrocarbon fuel. Operation exactly like the previous chart, airlifted by B-52, smaller rocket, because we're only going up to about Mach 4.7, then it separates from the rocket and propels itself. Okay, next please. All right, what DARPA was trying to do, everything I showed you in terms of hypersonic has been expendable. One shot, that's it. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you want to make it reusable. NASA, we didn't build, but that was meant to be reusable. So in order to make it reusable, you have to bring it back. We looked at the NASA X-43 by maybe chute recovery, but if you have a big enough chute and so on, everything gets bigger. the rocket to lift it, it's big and so on. Speaking of the program manager, they said we would have doubled the cost. They spent about $300 million on that program. Doubled it if we want to recover it. So another way to recover is having a propulsion system that could bring you home. And what was designed was a dual mode, having a hydrocarbon fuel, but having a turbine to take it up to Mach 3 to 4, transition to ramjet and scramjet, which the lower part of that chart shows you. And that is a challenge that's still there. If you ever want a reusable hypersonic system, you have to do something like that. And that's not easy, because if you want to recover it, say you accelerate this thing to transition and everything works. But when the turbine is not working, you have to cocoon it to protect it at the higher heat and higher Mach, right? And then coming back, you have to undo that and restart it. A lot of challenges for you guys. Next, please. This stuff, basically, I touch upon it. At the end of the program, we try to salvage something, which is just do the propulsion system, which would become motor, no transition. And you have to do the things I just described. Plus, just think of the ground facility. Forget about flying. Say you want to test this engine on the ground. With this ram and scram, you can test it in a blow-down tunnel. You know, you can very quick spurt. But if you want to transition the turbine to the ram and scram, that turbine has to be steady state, has to run for a while, right? So even running a ground test on this, in terms of having a facility to do it, is not as easy as it first appears. Next, please. So this is the concluding chart before I start answering your questions. I broke this thing into 4 panels. Typically, you do analysis, extreme left on the chart, structures. There's a Martin hypersonic end test structure that NASA Dryden to load it and heat it. And the engine is not a working engine, it was a hypersonic research engine, clear back in the 60s. That's how long we worked on it. And oh, by the way, that engine we flight tested on the F-15, X-15, in the middle of that second panel. You see that little lip in the ventral. And you know, you don't know things till you try. Or actually, there were thermodynamicists, or heat transfer guy was pretty embarrassed with fluid, and the shock interaction between the simulated engine, it was not an active engine, just the shape, to look at the aerodynamics of it. But the shock impingement between that engine and the X-15 burned the thing off. It was quite embarrassing to go out in the desert trying to find our engine, and plus, fortunately, I wasn't a thermal guy. The thermodynamics were pretty embarrassed. They probably should have caught it, but anyway, flight test is always intriguing. I show, you know, you do the analysis, ground test, then you go to flight, and I show, you know, some succeeded, at least on the bottom. X-15 was test bed, the X-43 called the 2 on top, the Air Force X-51, and Navy at high flight. High flight, I think I mentioned, it only flew 3 times, but it never got to the propulsion system because the subsystems failed before we got that far. But all that is still pointed testing. In order to try to get something useful, you know, that's why you have that chart marched toward application or utility. You still have to go to the integrated system to see how it really might work. We never got that before we got canceled, and the holy grail for hypersonic is still the same. It's a weapon, it's an airplane, and ultimately access to space. Basically, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. So, any questions, please? And I can't see very well, so speak up. Don't be shy. Yes? Yes, it's always disappointing. You live with something for multi-years, and it's disappointing. And but with the changes in leadership and how much these things cost, to give you an idea, you're talking about decades. Like NAS started in 1984, and it got canceled in '94, and then it got restarted as the X-43 sometime after that, and the last flight occurred in 2004. That's somewhere around 20 years. The other program that flew, X-51, started at, about 10 years before it flew. So it's not something that happens quickly. And when you talk about hypersonic, you're talking about large budgets. Large budgets need national concurrence, and often the leadership changes. So yeah, you have to get used to it. That it's disappointing, but it's exciting enough that we keep trying. And yes. Can't hear you.
Do you think that
success of what?
ASOM?
Yeah, ASOM, yeah. Okay. I think you're probably a little bit of each, which is a sort of a weasel answer, but there was a need because we had an enemy that we needed to counter with a higher speed system. But people in those days did more things, somewhat biased, okay? They don't have the tools we have today. They had to do things by really working on calculating themselves and not necessarily using a program. So they understood the physics, I think, in many cases better. And lastly, it was also funding that caused it to stop. Initially, the program, it was about 75 or something, was scheduled for about $2 billion for whatever they were trying to do, the number of it. And when it was terminated, because he used a titanium Inconel for the structure because of the temperature, it was $7 billion when the Air Force said, I can't afford it, stop it. And it depended on rockets instead of air breathing. And you mentioned were people disappointed. I know a gentleman that's still working that was working at ASOM, and he went up to the general when they decided to go with rockets. Again, rockets in that high speed ship, generally go shorter distances. He says, I never thought the Air Force would choose a pistol over a rifle in terms of range. Any other questions? Well, I'm delighted you guys are delayed dinner and come here and listen to this. I'd be happy to, if you guys have any questions, and Dr. Wellesley will allow him, I'd be happy to talk with you if you need more information on this area. Pardon me? Do we have time? Do you want to?
We have time.
We have time?
Yes.
Do you guys want to hear a slower program? Okay. Also worked on supersonic programs for almost the same sort of time. And it's not, well, in some ways, surprisingly, we have done more in hypersonic than in supersonic. At least we built some and flown some. Supersonic, the British and French succeeded in building. Is that it? Yeah. Anyway, the British and the French succeeded in building Concorde. You all know about it. Even the Russians succeeded in building Tu-144. We have never built a super cruise airplane. We don't have it up there? Okay. But I can talk to you about it without the charts because we haven't built anything. It's neat, you know. In the previous one, the reason another delay is that right about X-15 when it was doing good stuff and it was carrying a scramjet to looking at potential air breather, we got interest in the shuttle, so all the NASA money and everything went to rocket propelled. So we sort of stopped in the 80s and look at it again. In supersonic, we did, again, in comparison, it would be unlike the previous in rocket and air breather, it's like military and commercial. In military, we did pretty well. You know, we went from not knowing how to fly to the Wright brothers in 2000, I think in 1903, till we started flying, and I think we started flying within, well, I know by the time we flew 3 times the speed of sound. Forget about twice in terms of B-58s and F-104, somewhere when we changed from propellers to rockets, we went pretty fast. But in any event, 63 we're flying Mach 3. And from then we didn't emphasize speed, even in the military, but we emphasized other things, stealth, low observable, maneuverability, and so on. And even in terms of speed, we never went to sustain super cruise. We can fly supersonically with some of our fighters, but with afterburners, you can't go very far the way you suck up gas. So we've gone, you know, like F-22, best fighter, as far as supersonic flight. It's usually about 15 minutes for a lot of reasons. So in the commercial side, we've tried. NASA had a program in the 70s and in the 90s, but we never got to hardware. And that's one of the things that with Dr. Wellesley and some of the team here we begin to take a look at. We certainly can do it if there's a need. And with the globalization of business being all over the world, we certainly be able to give them half the time, it becomes important again. So we'll begin to take a look at it in case you guys are. To me, both areas are interesting, but obviously the supersonic is more doable. Both materials, propulsion. Hypersonic is more exciting, but in terms of a need, and I shouldn't tell you this, but it's usually a technology push. Smart people like you guys want to do it, you come up with reasons, but this may be good, but because of the cost, the guys that have to pay for it, that have the mission, we have not ever gotten them to say, I want it. It's really surprising, you know, having worked this thing so long, it's always tech push and not requirements pull. With supersonic, you might soon have a requirements pull. Until you get a requirements pull, the fight for budget every year is always challenging. Unless you happen to have someone who has the same technical interests that gets in a high position, it's very difficult to get the kind of funding.
Can you tell us a bit about what it was like working with Kelly Johnson at Skunk Works?
Oh, yeah. You can tell I'm really old, right? I was working at NASA. Actually, one thing I leave with you guys is if you do what you enjoy doing, that's the key. It really is. Right now, you think of rank, you think of money. Obviously, you got to have enough money. But if you like what you're doing, it's kind of fun. The reason I'm doing this too, whether fairly or unfairly, I've always felt my career has been a paid hobby. And that's kind of cool. I worked as a student co-op, work study at Pax River Naval Test Center. Then I went to Edwards, the Air Force Test Center, to work for NASA. And when I got through about 17 years, decided to see what the industry was like. I went to Lockheed when Kelly Johnson was just finishing his tour and Ben Rich was taking over. These are legends we read about. And one thing I discovered working there was not exact numbers, but organization, despite you hear that they're 10 feet tall, They're human beings. They're just like where you left. Then they, roughly 10%, 20% does all the work. The middle bunch do, average amount of work. There's 10% that still do nothing. They must have did something great a while back, or their boss's idiot nephew or something. But that was surprising to me that they were just like other people. But it was exciting because all the programs they work, and you learn, when you get, each culture has some difference. I haven't been taught, Rich, like in those days, classification was on the badge, alphabet. The biggies had more alphabets on the badge. New people only have 1 or 2 letters because those are one programs you. So that's one of the symbols. And another thing I noticed with people that really done a lot of things, to say humble, it sounds kind of made, but average. They are not like people that want to be noticed or want you to salute them all the time. It's in civilian terms like the real rich versus the nouveau rich, right? The real rich don't care you know they're rich. They wear normal clothes or it's the guys that want, or gals that want to show off how rich they are. The same with very smart leadership, that they're easy to deal with. People we have the top. Usually the problem is the middle bunch. Right? And it was exciting when I was there in '82. They just finished the Half Little, which preceded the 117 program. And you mentioned Harry Johnson. I remember getting down there even before I went down there when I was at Dryden. I had to go down for a meeting and rush down there, and it was a little late. There was a parking spot right in front, parked and ran into the conference room. And the program manager I was dealing with a little while came up to me and says, "Are you driving?" And such stuff. I said, "No." He says, "Give me the keys. It's your Kelly spot." That's why the room was, little things like that you remember. And at Dryden, those days it was like, well, even the Pax River was a lot of fun because we had a lot more airplanes. I feel sorry for folks these days when we work on 1 and 2. We have lots of airplanes going to work. And, a lot of the astronauts went through as test pilots. So later on, you say, "Oh, I knew you." So, and that's the real work. In fact, some people get annoyed when they ask me what do you do. I usually say when I did real work. But then you'll find in the beginning you become very good at something. And because you're good, you get promoted. And because you get promoted, you're beginning to do more and more, but with less depth. The joke was that when you get to the top, you know nothing about everything. And that's how sort of, and again, different parts, having been lucky enough to work in some great, field locations, and then working at headquarters, both NASA and the Pentagon, you begin to know what their problems are. And just simple example, when I was working at Dryden, I always thought that NASA headquarters people were idiots that keep wanting this and that, when I'm trying to do real work. But when you become an idiot for a year, you know why they want this stuff. And so when you go back, you're better because, things like that, until you walk in somebody else's shoes, you just don't realize their pressures. So anyway, those are experiences I had in these various organizations. And as a parting note, pick on things you really are passionate and you really like. Because if you do that, you're going to do that a lot. And you're going to be good at it. And if you're good at it, you're going to get promoted. It's that simple. If you're doing something for other reasons, you're looking at a clock. It's my 8-hour old today. And that's a long day. Well, don't want to keep you guys from dinner. So Thanks for coming.
That's all we have.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out.